Yat she Delyssa Begay shia de Bethlehem inshle when I got ni bashichin torich ini dashache tachini dashanala such it dan nasha ado So my name is Delyssa Begay. I come from Rough Rock, Arizona. My Navajo clans are Black Sheep, born for one who walks around. My maternal grandfathers are the Twitchini people, and my paternal grandfathers are the Red Streak into Running Water people. Those clans define who I am, and I am a teacher here at Rehoboth Christian High School. So it is nice to meet you, and I just want to share a little story with you. About a month ago, my mother had ended up in the hospital. It was an emergency, and we are living in a time of COVID where hospitals, we can't just go there and be with our loved ones like we were used to. My mother was in severe pain. She had to be flown out. The hardest thing was knowing that we could not be with her. We could not go into the hospital. We could only talk with her over a phone. It's probably one of the hardest times of my life. And I know many families in this area have experienced that. And so I turned to Rehoboth, the school I work at, the second family that I have. And I was I felt trapped and alone, that I could not be so close to people that your family, your loved ones. And so I reached out to my colleagues, my friends, and I asked for prayers. And I shared with them that my mother was in pain and that we needed prayers. And they all came together. And I was so touched by that. All the messages that I received, it was encouraging. And a few days had passed, and people were asking, "How is your mother? How are you?" And by then I started to share with the group that my mother was feeling better. It was still like the pain was not as bad as it was. And we were just so thankful. And I read all those messages to my mom. And just to see her just so touched, and her face, I could just imagine her humility, the tears that came out. I could see and feel this over the phone. It reminded me, I shared later with my colleagues, it reminded me of a story that my grandmother had shared with us. So I grew up in a traditional Navajo setting. My family practiced traditional ways, and I came to accept Christ in my life later. Right? So one of the customs that we have where I grew up, it's a very rural part of Arizona, where we're like summer and winter healing ceremonies. And one of the summer ceremonies requires that when the ceremony begins, you have a group of riders who usually men on horseback, and they symbolize warriors going to war. And so in this big ceremony, it's a huge ceremony, but it begins with the patient, in a sense, giving or starting off the ceremony. So this person is at battle with some kind of disease or sickness, and the warriors come together and they ride to go to war for this person. And so usually, like today, the riders, the men on horseback, will ride to another home, and what they do is they carry a coup stick, like they're going into battle. And so, as a child growing up, I just grew up around that. I didn't know all the details, and I can't say that I know everything about it, but I just remember like the women or the people would follow. So like my grandmother, my mother, we'd be in a vehicle, sometimes pulling a horse trailer so that we're following these riders. And so we arrive at another camp, we eat and so on. But we were waiting for the horseback riders to come by. And as they passed, we just saw this huge like roundup of horseback riders, all these warriors. And there were probably about 100 of them. And so as they ride along, other riders would come and join them because they knew that this was happening. And I remember saying, Mom, I have never seen this before, and then my grandmother, she heard me and she said, this reminds me. She goes, this reminds me of an ancient kind of relative. I shouldn't say ancient, but a relative and ancestor of ours. She said she was so sick, she was dying, that she couldn't move on her own anymore, and the people had to carry her around. She had been so weak. And eventually they decided to have this ceremony for her. And when the riders had arrived, to start, they carried her out into the to see them out of the Hogan. So she was out and she saw all of these riders, all of these men wanting to go to war for her. It wasn't an actual war, right? It was a war against some kind of illness or sickness, and she was dying. And to see so many of these riders ride for her, and they left, that my grandmother said, she goes, I remember that they said, she looked at them and she said, all of them, just for me. And it is said that she regained her health and she was able to come back to health. And she always fed and she always took care of the people after that, meaning that she fed them, she welcomed them in, and that she had been healed in that ceremony. And that's a story I remember as I thought of my mom. And she was in the hospital. And to hear all of these just encouraging comments, these prayers that people were sending, it just touched my mom so much, and I could feel it. And that's what it reminded me of, is this idea of people coming together, people praying for one another, and to know that as prayer warriors, I suppose, we could help, we could call on God, and God can see us. He knows we love one another. And I think that's incredible. And that's what I'm reminded of, especially in this time when people are separated, when people can't easily be with one another, that many of us are hurting. And to know that, just to know this for my mom, just encouraged her. And she's back home, and she's back with family. And just to know that, to know that people love her. And even though she's not met many of the people who are praying for her, it just touched and humbled her, and just reminded her, praising God the whole time, that God is good. God is good to us. So thank you for listening.